Welcome to the Review of Literature Party. I used to dread this writing task. I particularly remember in grad school dreading it. And then one time, a professor, and I wish I could remember her name because she wasn't a direct professor, it was like in a writing center um, kind of presentation thing. She explained it using this metaphor, and ever since then, it's made really perfect sense to me, and I enjoy thinking about it and teaching it. So I hope you will too. I also want to point out that this particular presentation is modeling the teaching I do, you do, we do instructional structure. So that's something to just kind of think about. This is the structure that is taught for teaching many lessons, but it's also just a really good structure, I think, in general for scaffolding how we teach writing and other subjects. So I want you to think about a party. Imagine that you're planning a huge event like a wedding, and money is no object. What are the steps to planning this kind of a party? Who would you invite? What's your theme? What will you serve? Will you have some kind of entertainment like a DJ, a live band, a special speaker? And how will you engage everyone so that all of your guests have an amazing time and talk about it in a good way afterwards? You're also going to want to think really carefully about your invitation list. Who do you want to invite? How will the people you invite interact with one another in a perfect world? How can you avoid leaving someone out or having someone feel like they feel left out? And how will you include all of the important people or those who think they are to avoid hard feelings? It's just so important to arrange these guests carefully. So you're going to want to create a table arrangement. And remember that money is no object, and you have been able to order lots of food, and everyone's going to have a sit-down dinner, and there's going to be multiple courses at that dinner. So oftentimes, if you go to a large event like this, you'll check into a table and you may receive a number, and that's the table that you are assigned to sit at. And often the party planners have thought really carefully about, or sometimes not all the time, but oftentimes really carefully about where you're sitting, who you're sitting with, so that you have something to talk about. So maybe if I was doing this, I would put family at table number 1, and maybe I would put a college roommate and a friend from high school at table 3, and maybe I would put, that crazy uncle and the college roommate at number 2, at table number 2, thinking about personalities and how they may or may not get along. Okay, so how does this relate in any way to our project? Imagine that each of your sources is a guest to your party, and each of the sources and their articles themselves, right? And then think about what you learned about each source or guest when you were reading their articles and writing your source summaries or annotated bibliographies. What kinds of conversation points came from these sources? Do the sources agree or disagree with each other on these points? So brainstorm to create a list of all the possible conversation topics that your guest sources might enjoy discussing with one another. The other thing I want you to think about is that the guests don't have to necessarily be together the whole time. So I'm going to talk about that in terms of party rules. You're going to arrange your sources into guest tables where they can best discuss their ideas, and note that they don't have to agree. And in fact, different opinions about the same conversation makes discussions more interesting. So each guest table needs to have at least 2 sources. Think about that you wouldn't want someone just talking to themselves at the table. That's kind of weird. Although we do that right with Bluetooth now. Guests can move between tables. For example, a couple of guests or a couple sources may be talking to each other on the same subject during the appetizer, but again, money's no object because you have all these different courses. Maybe in the main dinner course, they're going to swap tables and talk with somebody else. Think of it like a progressive dinner party. However, be aware that not all of your guests may want dessert. For example, some of your guests might not be able to contribute to all the conversations, and that's perfectly fine. A guest might be more concerned about his waistline and prefer to hover at the salad course table all night. As long as he's happy, you've done your job as a host, hostess. And then convey to your guests that they must talk about the conversation noted at their table. You've spent a long time thinking about this table arrangement with your event planner. So let's practice this a little bit together. This comes from an article that I published a really long time ago, and it's out of print, but it's hyperlinked in your agenda for the week. So you can pull that up at the same time and kind of see where this paragraph fits. But what I've done here is I have a snapshot of what some tables might look like, and then I have a snapshot of a paragraph from a review of literature segment. It's just one paragraph from it. So I'd like you to take a moment and read this to yourself. Okay, so let's identify who's sitting at the table. What are the names of the sources or the guests at your table? Right, it's Enders and Durst. Both of them are sitting at the table. So what are they talking about? And where could I find what they're talking about from the paragraph? That's right. So you can find what they're talking about in the paragraph from those topic sentences. And so usually in the first 1 to 3 sentences, you'll have a good sense of what they're talking about. And here we have the sentence, often composition students find the transition between secondary and post-secondary writing difficult because they come from varying backgrounds and levels of academic preparation. Academic preparation, you could also say varying backgrounds in academic preparation. That is the subject, or that's the thing in the middle of the table that the little place card that Enders and Durst are talking about here. Let's look at another one. So let's say that Enders and Durst are at this table, the blue table here. So let's look at the purple table here at the bottom and take a moment and read this paragraph to yourself. Okay, so who are the guests sitting at this table? Absolutely. You have Bartholomew, you have McCune, and you have Stoddart. I have to say, I have to interject here that Bartholomew's Inventing the University is one of my favorite composition essays about academic discourse. So if you're not familiar with that, please look that up. And actually, it's probably been referenced already in some of our Naming What We Know readings. And so what are they talking about? What are these 3 sources talking about at this table? That's right. They're talking about this kind of bridge, creating this bridge between familiar discourse in other experiences of life that they have, and academic discourse, or discourse in the university or in a particular discipline within the university. All right, so you get the idea about how these will work. So you're going to apply this to your project. So take a moment and you're going to draw some circles on a paper. But before you do, I just want to show you that here is another source that I gave you, and I hyperlinked this article also in your agenda this week. And this is called a synthesis matrix. It is a step before setting up these tables if you want to do some more visualization. It's not required. But if you look on the left-hand, far left column, these are the things that sources are talking about. These are the topics. So this is for a different research question about sea turtles, but you can see habitat and adaptation is in the first row. The second row is conservation and human responsibility, and so forth. Then at the top of the chart are all of the sources. And so there are 5 sources here. And then within the rows are the quotes that connect between those sources and that topic. So if you look at row 1, you would put habitat and adaptation in the middle of a table, and you would have Morskowski, and I probably butchered that name, Mike, Spatilla, Pike, Spatilla, Gass, and Stern. I'm sorry, Spatilla would not be at that table, but the other 4 would. You'll notice that some of them, like row 2, have all 5 sources at the same table having a conversation about conservation and human responsibility, whereas there's only 3 sources talking about economic considerations at that table. So here's your template, and this just, you can do this on your own on a sheet of paper, and it gives you a sense of drawing these different circles after you make your list of potential topics. And you can play with the order of the tables, you can play with the topics, maybe some of them you'll combine and things like that later, but it gives you a way to visualize. When you begin writing your review of literature, each one of these tables is equivalent to a paragraph or 2 in the review of literature, give or take. And so that gives you a sense of how you want to order those and how you want to go about applying what you do in this visualization here for organizing your review of literature into your writing process itself. I look forward to reading your review of literature pieces or segments, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me.